A lot of charisma on stage here, so we're gonna bring it again. First, just a name and a company from y'all, but first let's just kind of get on the row. Introduce yourself a little bit more, what you're doing, how it might relate to scaling Ordinals adoption in the future here.
Yeah, so I'm Erin Redwing. So I guess what I have up there is Open Ordinals Institute. So I'm like president, CEO, whatever title it ends up being. I'm not actually sure, to be honest. But that's just the nonprofit institution that funds the open source development on Ord. So basically pays for RAF to work on it. And then I also am CEO of Inscribing Atlantis, which is more events, consulting services for inscribing. And also similarly work with RAF and the devs from the core team on that as well.
Alex?
Okay, I'm Alex. I'm basically the CSO of like Track System, which is like the development company for the token Track, which is a decentralized oracle for Bitcoin. And then as well like the TAP protocol, which is like a meta protocol for Ordinals, and as well PIPE protocol, or PIP, like Chinese says, which is another protocol that is a UTXO model, a little bit similar to Runes, as well a bunch of meme coin as well.
Awesome. I'm Jan. Before I introduce myself, I just want to say, Erin, you're doing a good job because Raf is literally working on it right now.
That's what I like to see.
You know, you're doing a very good job in terms of managing that. But yeah, so my name is Jan. I am from Xverse. We're the #1 Bitcoin wallet for Web3. We have been working in the ecosystem for a couple of years already. And also we're the top wallet for Bitcoin Ordinals and, you know, kind of the trends that kind of popped up this year. And yeah, just excited to be here and talk to all of you about Ordinals, Bitcoin, and what we can see in the future.
Hi everyone, I'm Benjamin, the co-founder and CEO of Darewise Entertainment, which is a subsidiary of Animoca brands. We're originally a gaming company that kind of evolved into a Web3 operator, focusing really dedicated to bringing the metaverse on Bitcoin through different angles. We're developing this very ambitious MMO called Life Beyond, Unreal Engine 5, high-end graphics that we've been developing for several years now and that we're bringing to Bitcoin by the end of 2024. And we're also developing a bunch of technologies for the metaverse, including soon launching the Bitcoin metaverse ecosystem with a bunch of great partners, like these guys here and others that we'll announce soon in the next few weeks. And also the now creator of this new community called Sparks. So we've been very busy and very excited to be here today.
Awesome. We've heard a lot of happy birthdays for Ordinals yesterday, today, which is fun. But also really kind of underlines how early this is. We're a year into this. It's crazy. Kind of that we're all, you know, multi-$100 million, billion-dollar companies are focusing so much energy on this already. To start, Erin, can you kind of set the stage for how we got here a year out? What have been kind of the important factors, growing the community, growing kind of what's being built from your perspective here?
Yeah, so I think it's honestly like really incredible timing that you know, Casey gave this keynote talk and he said like, you know, if you want to start playing around with runes on Signet, literally I think it went live like at like 1 a.m. last night, or I don't know when him and Raph like finished working on it last night, but you know, I think it's, you know, people keep saying like, oh, it's the 1-year birthday of Ordinals, like it's really more like the birthday of Inscription 0, which is not quite the same as like Ordinals as like the sort of movement ecosystem that we know. Like I would more say like January 20th is like Ordinals' birthday in the sense that that's when Ord Inscribe launched on mainnet and then people could start kind of playing around with it. And I think like similarly right now, like, you know, obviously Inscription 0 was on mainnet, Casey was playing around with it. There were some people that were kind of playing around with it before the tool sort of like officially launched, but I think we're in kind of a similar thing now, which is interesting, where it's like, you know, you can kind of like play around with runes, like you could play around with Ordinals in those early days, and then, you know, the mainnet launch is later. So I kind of consider like Ordinals' birthday to be January 20th for that reason, and I'm kind of curious to see like, I mean, that's like a couple weeks away, but with how quickly everything changes, like, who the fuck knows what things are gonna be like by January 20th, even in like a few weeks.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, let's come to you. A company that's really giving people the tools to access everything and you know, company existed long before that. What kind of took you into developing products for this? How important of an ecosystem is it for y'all moving forward? How did that kind of start?
Yeah, I mean, it's it's part of the mission that we started this company with, right? So we basically, I think it was 2.5 years ago, maybe a little bit more than that. Ken over there, our founder, started this company. Basically, we want to build wallet for Bitcoin Web3. So basically, people building applications either on the layer 2s and obviously on the layer 1 as well. But there wasn't really much that people were really building there at the time, and so we kind of moved around the ecosystem. And when we saw Ordinals happening in January, when people actually started to talk about exactly, Erin, as you mentioned, like January, February, that's where, the fire really started to happen. People watching, okay, this is sub 1,000, this is sub 10K inscription, and we were talking about it on the Ordinal show like for 16 hours straight, at some point as well. And so, so when we saw that, it was like, hey, this is perfect. Like this is what we actually wanted to see from the very beginning, and now we're seeing it. People are doing NFTs or digital artifacts on Bitcoin. And so obviously it was a no-brainer for us to just jump into it straight up. And I know that Ken at the time, like I was talking with him, I was like, hey Ken, like we have to drop everything what we're doing right now, and like we have to go full speed. And he literally like said, okay, I'm gonna cancel my vacation. And over the weekend, he basically, kind of with the team launched the first kind of version of the support. For us, we were able to move that quick because obviously, again, we have been building around Bitcoin for a very long time, and we kind of had that setup already ready. It was just about making some of those changes, to support that protocol really 100%. But again, it was obvious for us. It wasn't really anything that we would say, no, we're not going to do it. I mean, we wanted to see more activity on Bitcoin from day one of starting this company. So again, it was a no-brainer.
Yeah. As you mentioned, you came to this, with a focus on Bitcoin already. Ben, you're kind of in a little bit of a different seat in terms of, most of what y'all had done in the past focused maybe on other chains. I think Casey, in his talk this morning, talked about this, I think gutting all other chains is the term that he used. So how did you come into this with kind of the history that y'all had, and how did that get started?
I think it's funny because a lot of us, have kind of experienced the same process, I would say, of like, we're dropping everything. And that was the same for us. It was in May, end of May, I remember very well, like just looking at, and what was going on, even though you remember it's the point where it started to tank a little bit, the volume of Ordinals transactions, but it didn't matter because it was just opening the gateway, of just a completely new journey for Bitcoin. And because the fundamentals were so obvious. Not obvious for everyone to understand apparently, because we had to argue with some people when we decided to do that, but it's just that if the possibility to bring utility to the most prestigious blockchain, the biggest brand, the biggest liquidity was possible, then there would not be a point, I think, to build on other ecosystems, except if you're really attached to a very strong specificity that they have. And it can be a cultural one. I'm thinking about like ApeCoin, for instance, that will become its ecosystem in its own and will have its own chain eventually. And of course, then there's no point, to say, okay, we're abandoning everything there. But if you're on Polygon, or if you're on other ecosystems that you don't have a strong connection other than just it's facilitating because I can run my applications then. If you can run this thing on Bitcoin, then why wouldn't you? And that's really how we processed this back then. And that's why we dropped everything.
Yeah, it's great. Part of the context for this talk is building communities. Jan, you mentioned how spaces were kind of an early medium for people talking about this, getting the word out, bringing people in. Alex, you've been in Korea for the last decade or so, been through the last couple of cycles out of Seoul. You've put on some big events there yourself. How are you thinking about community media as this ecosystem specifically is growing this cycle here?
Well, I think like people, like a bit like other people say, like on the previous panels, like people want things that maybe developers don't really expect, I would say. Like if we take our example, like in the mix, what we did is like Benny just decided to go with track just because we thought that there was a need for a decentralized indexer on BRC20 at the beginning, right? And he decided to make a fair launch, as usual, a fair mint. He forgot to mint a token himself, so we got like 0 token. We started to be on ramen diet for the next 6 months, I would say. And then suddenly Casey just came up with like some idea like Rune, I think in September or something, and at that moment, Benny as well, again, was, he had Corona, right? And he was like actually sick and thought that, oh, that would be a fun idea to troll Casey, right? So he made the protocol just in order to just like try to mimic the spec and show that he could do it. Things went a little bit out of hands on our side, and we didn't plan anything, and again, we didn't mint any pipe. So again, ramen for us. And that's a little bit like the concept. What we want to do at the beginning is try to build things that we think are actually interesting, and then a bunch of DGen come and just start to try to make other use of it, and we try to go with the flow and just adapt, right? I think that's more or less like the way that you bring community. It's a little bit like retarded, I know, but it works, you know?
There we go. One more shout out to Raph. I think this is the 5th one here on just this panel, but he mentioned on his talk earlier about how being in person with the community was so important for not just understanding kind of the dynamics between kind of more hardcore maxi culture and what's going on now here, but just sharing perspective in person. Through Atlantis, what have you seen kind of doing in-person events, how that's developed over the last year, how important it is moving forward? And then Jan, I know you're thinking about events, in-person stuff out here in Hong Kong, so maybe if both of y'all could touch on that.
Yeah, I think it's been really interesting to kind of do Ordinals events in different like environments or different communities. So for example, like the event that we did in Amsterdam, I think we literally hit like the bottom of the Ordinals market like at that time. Like we were at the bottom in Amsterdam, and that was actually really cool because I feel like it was a very like OG bonding sort of event where everyone who was there, it's like, I'm curious to see like where everyone is in 3 years, for example, and that was like a very different feeling than like we just were in Miami for Art Basel last week, and Art Basel is, first of all, like traditional art world, which is not necessarily NFTs, but then there's also the kind of Ethereum and like Solana NFT sort of crypto world, and that's a totally different experience, like doing an Ordinals event in an ecosystem like that. And so it's been kind of fun to sort of try out different things, and I love going and talking to people and just getting a sense of like what do you know about Ordinals? Are you interested in this? And like some of them are like, no, not at all. It's like, okay, great, like good to know. But I don't know. It's like the summit that was in Singapore, the Ordinal Summit in Singapore in September was like so encouraging. I think like for all of us that were working on Ordinals, because we realized like, oh wow, there's this whole community of people in Asia that care about this that we don't really get a ton of exposure to unless we come here and talk to people. And so then like, yeah, coming to Taiwan for this was also then a no-brainer, where it's just like the energy in Asia for Ordinals is really, really interesting and different than like what we have in the US. And it's exciting. So I don't know if you want to talk about like future events, maybe take it.
Yeah, definitely. I think I would love to maybe answer it in 2 ways. Your question about the real life events and like why they matter, even to us as a company, right? It's really important to be close to the users, because yes, like you can get a lot of feedback through Twitter and stuff like that, but actually having those in-person conversations and seeing people using your product in front of your eyes and telling you the harsh feedback, hey, this is not really working the way I want it to work. You can collect a lot of these insights, and that's gonna, help us really improve, right? Because I would like to say that we have so many things to improve and so much work to do. We have been in this for almost a year, and I would say yes, to some extent we have done a pretty good job in kind of onboarding and kind of scaling the ecosystem, making it easier for people. But again, like we're definitely we still have a long way to go, to make it like really, really smooth and really the way even I would want it, in the ideal scenario world. So that's one. And the second, Erin, I fully agree, right? I think, I'm European living in Asia for the past almost a decade now, and I have seen it over and over and over again that no matter if you're in Web 2, Web 3, I feel like that world is kind of disconnected. The Asian world and the Western world. And so I think this is also like one of the contributions that we want to do for the space is like if we can host these real life events, like Naki did in Singapore, and we're already planning many others. We're planning a pretty big one, in Hong Kong next year, around the halving, around what you guys are going to do in Hong Kong, probably with the Bitcoin magazine. And so like we definitely just want to make sure that the community continues to grow and people can interact and get feedback from one another and really, just bring more excitement, So I really believe that like community and real life connection is like one of the most important things for any ecosystem to really grow.
But I think it also shows at what level of development we are right now, where, I've visited more countries with Jan than I have with my own wife. It's crazy. We have, like, I think Ordinals is very tribal, but not in the Ethereum sense, where you have all of these different tribes. It's more like a big family right now, which is also probably why we all enjoy it so much. And so it's still early, we still feel like we have to be together and to meet all the time, because this is also where we actually secure a lot of these foundational relationships that actually ended up, building the network effect together. Before we can, it feels like the scaling is really going to happen in 2024, and that we were kind of building the foundation so far. I think they're a great foundation. And Bitcoin also has this very unique culture that is super different from any other ecosystem, in terms of, it's almost mystical at some point. So I think it's very, it speaks volume about what is about to happen, and it's probably why it's getting so attractive right now to people.
Yeah, I think that's a good insight. And staying with you, you also kind of come from the world of more online communities, gaming, what's happening there. Can you give us a little bit of insight into how kind of that world onboarding into this is going to affect that scaling, how you kind of see that playing out?
So I actually think that, when you look at Web3 gaming is completely underdeveloped in general. We're talking about 3 million crypto gamers in the world. This is ridiculous compared to the 3 billion players out there. And I don't think that the reason why it has struggled so much to scale was the user experience. I think the real reason is because we haven't had good products in general. A very limited number of good games so far. And once we started having this is when I think we're going to start having a very interesting combination between good products and a strong brand, which is Bitcoin. And so the difference between having a good game, but that having to onboard people into something that they're absolutely unaware of. They know about crypto, but if they know about crypto or they have heard of crypto, they know about Bitcoin. And so I think it's going to create a highway of adoption, rather than doing like a game on, like a good game, but on, let's say, Avalanche, where it's like now an additional step of education, of learning, rather than Bitcoin, it's a no-brainer, people know about it. It's just the biggest brand for crypto. So I believe that once we start having good games, and hopefully we'll help onboarding many in 2024, we will see also a big surge of adoption of new users, but new users who will be new to crypto in general, not just new users coming from other ecosystems like Ethereum.
Yeah, we're all traveling a lot. To your point on traveling even more with Jan than maybe your wife. We're all over the place, but we also have a pretty good mix of geographic mix just between us here, North America, Asia, Europe. Maybe specifically for each of those markets, and our businesses are global, but how maybe from kind of the last few years and scaling that's taken place in the past, looking forward, specifically in North America, specifically in Asia, specifically in Europe? What are kind of the dynamics that we need to be careful with as Ordinal scales from a community perspective, maybe from a product perspective too? Erin?
Yeah, I mean, I think I mostly like can speak on like the cultural community level. Like, I think that in general, culture is just becoming more and more niche. Like, that's just a general statement, not just within crypto or technology or whatever, but certainly, of course, internet-based cultures are even more so. And I think it's interesting, like when I try to, talk to my friends that are artists about Ordinals, they don't even like realize that there's like a rift between Bitcoin and crypto, right? Like that's to me something that's like so present in my mind, that those are like different things with very, very different communities and values and like everything. But for people that like, as Ben was talking about with like onboarding people that have never done anything in Web3 or crypto or Bitcoin, whatever, they don't necessarily see like the nuances of those kind of like cultural differences. And in some ways I think that's really good, in the sense that like, I think that Bitcoin is like a big tent, and ideally if we have mass adoption of Bitcoin, there's going to be many, many, many different cultural niches within Bitcoin that don't interact with each other at all, and don't have, Bitcoin is for your enemies and for your friends kind of stuff. But I think like there's interesting, like as Ben was saying also, like there is like this mystical sort of vibe to Bitcoin that I think speaks to people, and that I like was a big reason why I got into Bitcoin. And I like playing into that like digital artifact, like permanent on like the mother chain that like will never go away. And if there's an apocalypse tomorrow, you'll have your art downloaded on all of these nodes all around the world. Like some of the things that I'm most excited about are these like weird sort of like kind of esoteric cultural, I think, projects and movements that can come out of this. So. I don't know, like that probably speaks to like nothing that you guys.
I love the way you put it.
I'm interested. I want to learn more.
Yeah.
Sounds like we're gonna have ceremonies and.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's just, but I think like there's all these like weird niches and interests, and especially with internet communities, it's like even more so. And so, anything that can kind of like bring that into Bitcoin, like I think Bitcoin is good for people, and so I want all of these kind of different niche interests, artistic movements, etc., to kind of come onto Bitcoin. I think Ordinals makes it fun and interesting for a lot of people to do that.
But it creates a great foundation, you see, because like we were talking about the cursed and blessed, inscriptions today. So you have this kind of base layer, I would say, of the cultural movement, and then on top of this, of course, we're like, eventually when we'll figure out a way to bring my mom into Bitcoin, I don't think she'll care about that, but it will be built on something that is inspiring us so much, that it will create, I think, a very, very strong foundation for growth.
Yeah, my comment on kind of, you asked about like Asia and Europe and US maybe differences. I mean, from a product standpoint, right? Like we're building a product here. I think, you ultimately have to localize, not necessarily the product itself, but even like the go-to-market strategy and like how you communicate to different users in different regions and different cultures. And we see it pretty clearly, right? When you look at Asia, I would say that the token narrative is something that really leads the way, right? Like I sometimes say, like when people ask me about like Ordinals and how we got here, like we wouldn't really be here today at the level we are without like BRC20 and Asia and even China specifically, like really like adopting that so heavily, right? And so I think that's something that you have to be mindful of, and that's what we're doing as well. Like we're also trying to come up with the strategy, like how do we localize for specific markets within Asia, right? Because you cannot say Asia is the same, like every Asian country is the same. No, like if you're here in Taiwan, it's going to be different than if you go to India, for instance, or if you go to Korea, and stuff like that. So I think that's something really that you have to be mindful of, and we're definitely spending a lot of time on that, and it's very important, from the product perspective or building a startup perspective.
Yeah.
I will just add some things, like I agree with Jan here for example, for the Korean market, right? As I'm staying there and I know the market quite well now. If you don't localize like things, you're pretty much like going to have a really bad time there, both on the product perspective, but as well on the marketing perspective too, right? I think from all I hear, I'll just say that, like, my only difference, like the only thing that I think is a little bit different from others, like at the moment, we are kind of here like the hipster, the OG hipster in Bitcoin. That's still my view on it. When I speak with like people, they still believe that they need to buy one full Bitcoin in order to enter Bitcoin. That's pretty much the vibe around like people not talking to each other too much inside conference, right? So like the normal like Joes outside, right? So I think they will need like a lot of education, particularly when we are just like starting to talk ordinal, right? If you take like anybody that is even like a normal like Joe outside of Bitcoin ecosystem and ordinal, and you try to explain them how ordinals are working, you're just going to have a very bad time, guys. Like probably just like at least need 2 or 3 hours of explanation to come to something. So imagine with like your grandma trying to get something on ordinals, like it's going to be a pure mess. So what I believe like the products needs to do, on top of just only going to be localized and just like marketing, is education, and as well like friendly UI. As much as you can dumb down your product, the more user you will get inside it. That's pretty much what I think.
Yeah, just to add to that a little, like I think I know, to reference Raph again, I've heard Raph use this analogy before, like, if you think about Bitcoin as being digital gold, like most people don't own a bar of gold, and like that's way over their price margin to even think about buying gold as an investment, but many people own gold jewelry, right? And like if you think about ordinals as being gold jewelry and kind of like a decorative, fun, expressive thing, it becomes a lot more accessible to people than I think Bitcoin as like a hard money investment asset. And so I don't know, I like that analogy I think really works.
Yeah, the positioning and kind of how the opportunity to position it changes is an interesting point. Jan, to Alex's point on kind of making it intuitive for even grandmothers to interact in the future, as more intuitive ways to interact with it now, what are kind of you thinking about specifically there? You want to touch on anything else product-wise, from a wallet perspective, on what's important here?
Yeah, I think ultimately, yes, like you want to make it as intuitive, as simple to use as possible, and abstract a lot of those complexities that users don't even have to know about, right? Like ultimately, like I can give an example. So what we did in Xverse with BRC20 tokens, right? So everybody, well, if you looked into BRC20 tokens, you know that they're quite complicated if you want to move them around, because it's not just simply sending it to another address, but you need to create another inscription, and then you need to send that inscription to the other address. And so I remember when BRC20s were kind of like growing for the very first time, people were DMing me every single day, and they're like, hey, what is this transfer inscription? Like, what do I do with it? I want to transfer it there. I want to transfer it to Binance. I'm like, how do I do this? How do I make sense of it? And you need to understand these guys are degens. Like, these guys are Solana degens. These guys are Ethereum degens, and they couldn't figure it out, or at least, well, I don't want to say they couldn't figure it out, but it was confusing, right, for many of these people. And so we basically abstracted that away, because honestly speaking, you don't even have to know what's happening in the background. What you want to accomplish is you want to take this ordi or whatever you own, you want to send it to another address. So that should be the process, how it should work, right? And so that's what we did. And ultimately, there's going to be many of these other things that we're going to be doing. I also want to say that, that's the ultimate goal, right? Like you kind of want to build towards that you abstract a lot of those complexities. But again, let's be real. Those things are not going to happen overnight, because it takes time to build some of these things. And you can see that degens can be, they can figure stuff out. If they see that they can make money, if they see that all these tokens are pumping, all these ordinals are pumping, they have an incentive to figure out, even though the user experience is maybe not the greatest, not the smoothest, And so, again, we're gonna get there, like we're in the early stages, and the products are improving. Obviously, we're making improvements almost every single week, launching new things and features, and again, we just need a little bit more time, but the ultimate goal is like, yeah, make it as smooth and as simple to use as possible, so that even your grandma, or your mom can at some point buy an ordinal.
My grandmas are not here anymore, but my mom at least.
Yeah. Kind of the referencing a panel earlier, the Galactic Casino is kind of the stage that we're still in now. And Albert also went through some interesting stats on adoption, where kind of things are, number of inscriptions, transaction fees. Ben and Jan, what do you think the important metrics are to be tracking, as we think about scaling? And what do you kind of see in the next 12 months, just based on your internal metrics, as being the important things to track, how things are tracking? Yeah.
So I think from the first one that I'm very interested in, and I keep asking people, to share their stats with me, so we can have a better view. But it's of course the number of wallets, because and of course what we're trying to qualify is just how many real people are behind these wallets to see if there's really like a greater adoption. Of course, we're also going to look at transaction happening on chain, because I think this is how people see activity. Even though I think that we can eventually see different type of usage within these apps, because of course the point is not to have everything running on chain, and especially with Bitcoin. It's to figure out smart ways to use the infrastructure where it's needed and to offload when it's not. And especially for gaming, we're never going to run the game logic on chain. But having really I think the focus for me in 2024 is to see if there's a real growth in the number of wallets that are created, to see if we really manage to deliver, the messaging about the value that is, the opportunity and the value of the services that are now being developed, the product, the service now being developed on Bitcoin.
Yeah, add to that, obviously the number of wallets is very important. We're tracking that obviously, and I can tell that it's growing. It's growing pretty substantially. Probably not going to share any specific numbers. Maybe we can chat one-on-one, but it has been good. And so that's obviously very important. Yes, there is this downside that obviously people can have multiple wallets, right? And so I don't think that there is some metric that you can 100% with 100% certainty say how many people, actual people, unique users are in it. But again, if the unique wallets keep growing, that's awesome. What I also think is very important, and that's why Erin, we touched on the in real life events. I think that's very important kind of metric, to really look at, because what I think is very unique about Bitcoin and even the ecosystem that we're building here, it's the incentives are kind of there, but they're not as crazy as in other ecosystems, because there's no foundation with hundreds of millions of dollars that they can just basically give out money and have people to host events and big hackathons and stuff like that happening. And so the activity that you see in these events in Ordinals and in Bitcoin, it's very organic. It's really done by the builders. Obviously they have an incentive to support these events, these organizers, and this community to continue to grow. But also it's done by the users and the people that want to become the ambassadors of the movement. And so more and more events we see, and if these events gonna continue to grow in size, that's a great metric, right? That's a great sign that hey, this ecosystem is growing and people are excited to participate in that. So personally I would be looking into that as well.
Yeah. And we put on the Bitcoin conference, and at the last event in Miami, Ordinals just kind of snuck up to become the main talking point essentially at the conference coming out of it. And on numbers, I can tell you that I can be a little bit more forthright maybe, because it's less proprietary. But we're tracking for much higher attendance even than in Miami and Nashville this year. Alex, do you want to touch on that kind of metrics that you're interested in tracking? To get a sense of adoption, growth of the community.
Sure. On our side, what we're just checking mainly is the number of degen in our Discord, of course. The minting that happened both on tap or on pipe, right? That's a no-brainer. But we try to check more about the number of builders, right? Simply because we believe that in order to have the ecosystem being actually stable, we need to build all the infrastructure around it so things can be usable. My complaint that I had with BRC20, for example, is it's not as flexible as we would like to be, right? So we simply build tap. Around tap, what we do is we invite developers, for example, to come and just build all the infrastructures that are needed in order for people to use the protocol, right? And then we would just like be happy to get like more people inside. But again, from like other panels, something that was like coming back often again is like the lack of liquidity in the market, right? It's really complicated at that moment to solve these kind of issues without going directly on partnership with like Tether, for example. And the simple reason is simply because when people use Ordinals, then most of the time, you know, in order to build projects, a lot of projects on the EVM side require to actually just like go through Launchpad. Right? When you go through Launchpad, you're just going to put either a USDT, USDC, or anything in order to bootstrap the project in exchange of coin, right? And what happened later on is like those USDC are used in the market in order for the project to simply just buy the developers. The real problem now on Ordinal that I see myself is like there is no stable, right? So most of the time the project needs to be accumulating BTC, right? And people just don't want to use their Bitcoin. Like that's the problem, you know? If you come with a narrative of like BTC being a store of value, why would you give like a bunch of BTC to a project to build something on your ecosystem? So what we believe at the moment to be a real problem is like, if we manage later on, for example, and we're just doing that at the moment, is like to bring some EVM components, at least some EVM wrap USDT or anything into our protocol, then you will have like more liquidity and more project building on the protocol. More project building means actually more activity means more degen coming.
And actually, if I can add to that, it's a very interesting point because it reminds us of what happened on Ethereum. And without having to kind of replicate the Ethereum playbook, what really drove liquidity to Ethereum was DeFi. And so, of course, you know, DeFi liquefies the market, the ecosystem, brings more like volume of liquidity, so that creates more opportunities. So it's interesting because, of course, one of the things that now we see, you know, through Liquidium, through Alex, that are things that are really being pushed to Bitcoin is DeFi. And once we start having DeFi, I think we're also going to see a massive surge in the ecosystem. That will also be one of the things that will propel the growth of the whole Bitcoin ecosystem, whether it's Bitcoin and Bitcoin including the layer 2s.
Alex, you kind of touched on a point that was the analogy I think on an earlier panel was that you know, all this acquired Bitcoin that people are sitting on is like a dam. What are the valves that are going to release, you know, other use cases here? From each of you, like for the case of someone who really does just want to hold their Bitcoin, they don't necessarily want to use it. They want to hold it, you know, for 10 years and for it to be able to be used in the same way in 10 years as it is today. Why should they be bullish about Ordinals? Why should they be excited about the growth of that community? Erin, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I think the thing that's most interesting from maybe like a hodler sort of Bitcoin perspective is the censorship resistance. So, for example, like I would love to see people inscribe essentially like the Library of Alexandria that can't be burned, right? Like we have the power here to put any information that we want on Bitcoin and it can never be removed. And I think that permanence and that censorship resistance it adds value to Bitcoin as an asset. Even if you just want to hold it, you don't want to do any of that yourself. So yeah, I want to see more of that for sure.
I would say like, yeah, just to keep on that point, it's not only about like putting the data on Bitcoin, but using them as well. Because the advantage of having the data somewhere is that you can use those data, you know? And when you can use them, then you can just like always benefit from them. So there is this, you know, and I think that's probably the most interesting part here.
Yeah, my take is actually pretty simple. So, I mean, if you're that person that just want to hold Bitcoin and do nothing with it, that's fine. Do that. It's a great strategy, right? Ultimately, I want to hold as much Bitcoin as I can. But that doesn't mean that you should not be rooting for Ordinals and the ecosystem that is happening here, because what's happening here, all the innovation and stuff, is making Bitcoin more sustainable. You know, like miners are happy, you know, the people that are around here are happy, and so, you know, that's another catalyst for the Bitcoin price to go up, you know? So So ultimately, if you don't want to buy any ordinals, I mean, you don't have to, right? Like, you know, only do whatever you think is best for you for your strategy, but it doesn't mean that you should be, you know, negative and that you should be like hating on what's happening here, you know, because again, it just doesn't make sense, you know.
And I think it actually also shows that maybe one of the issues that we're facing sometimes is that we're using the same word, Bitcoin, for the infrastructure and the token. And so there's a difference for me, of course, that you can hold the token, but you can still be thinking of the infrastructure to run so many different other things than, you know, the transfer of value of this specific token. So rooting for ordinals and let's say if ordinals as digital artifact but also as fungible token is because we still want, you can still be sitting on your tokens but still see this as an opportunity to use the infrastructure more, to reward miners more, and so to kind of fluidify this ecosystem. And on top of that, I think we're going to see you know, on-ramps, tools that will make it, you know, possible for people to access ordinals without having to go through the Bitcoin transactions. You know, so they will basically come with their US dollars and interact with this whole ecosystem, and that will of course create even more opportunity for ordinals in general, whether it's through the fungible token or through the digital artifact.
Yeah. Great insights, great info overall on how ordinals grows from here. Thanks for all your perspectives, and bullish.
Thank you.
Time.
Thank you.